Alright, welcome back. So this is the second part of my structure videos. So in the first part I covered what structures are. They're basically a container or collection of different elements where you can add functions to manipulate them. Kind of gave you an example using a tuple, then converting it to a struct, then showing you instances. And actually I wanted to mention something that I actually didn't mean initialization here. I actually meant instance or instantation. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but the thing is with structs, there is no initialization because structs are initialized by their variables or constants. So here the struct is already initialized because we have variables or we have constants in it. So here we have constants and down here we have variables. So the struct is already initialized once we set them. What we are doing with them is we're actually creating instances of them. So just wanted to make that really clear since I mispronounced it and actually used a completely wrong context in general. So there we go, little thing. Another thing I wanted to explain too is that structures are value types. And what I mean by value types is that structures and enums are passed by value, and what that means is that they live in the heap or memory, and then when you copy them to another structure, so here I've copied player 3 into player 4, so it does contain a pointer to the values that are in player 3, so right now it pretty much contains everything that player 3 contains, but once you actually change something about player 4, like say you change the age or you change the name, then it's actually completely copies everything. So just FYI, once you mutate it is when it actually copies. And mutating, what I mean by that is if you change something or you, so if you add something or subtract something from that copied value or copied structure. So hopefully that makes sense. Like I said, sometimes I make mistakes in these videos, and again, I try to make sure that I lead you down the right way if I found that I said something incorrectly. Okay? Alright, so today what I'm going to cover is computed properties. So computed properties, what that is it is a mechanism in which we create properties. They don't necessarily store a value, but what they do is allow you to compute the value. And the best way to kind of show you this is to use something that we already know how to do. So in this above example here, where I have struct person extended, I'm just going to copy this over into here. So here I'm actually going to change this to computed. Actually, I'm going to say a person with computed property. Alright, so just like how we build a regular structure, we have our variables here, our first name and last name. And then we have our function here that returns the full name. Now, actually, I'm going to keep this like this, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add another function here that will compute the birth year based off of the age. So I'm actually going to add one thing up here. I'm going to add another variable, or actually I'm going to make this a constant that will be named age, and it will be integer. So when we use this structure, when we create another instance of this structure, person with computed property, it's going to have an additional property, which is age. Okay. And from that computed property, what I want to do is I actually want to get the birth year. And so I'm going to introduce a couple of new things here But it's fun to kind of see something a little different actually using Swift and its classes and functions and whatnot. Okay, and I'll explain things as I go along like usual. So here I'm going to create a function that will calculate the birth year. Okay, so let's go ahead and do function like we usually do. We're going to do birth year. And just like above, we're not going to bring in any parameters because function birth year will see everything that's inside of our structure. So it will see first name, last name, and age, and what we're going to use is age. But what we are going to return is an integer, which will be the year that this person was born. Alright, so the first thing I want to do is I want to grab the date, our current date in our computer. So how am I going to do that? Well, first of all, we're going to do a constant because we don't really want this to change when we're actually computing it. And I'm going to use NSState. Now what NSState is an object that will represent a single point in time. And what this does is it pulls the date from your computer. Okay. If you again want to learn more, remember a little fun thing here is hold down the Option key, hover over NSState, click on it, and it'll give you everything you ever want to know about NSState. And you can also check the reference. So go ahead and click the reference and it will pop up everything about NSState. So NSState objects are immutable. That's why I made let date over here equal constant. And this is going to provide us a lot of methods and things that we can do with the date. Okay. Alright, so I've created a new constant that looks at NSState. Now the next thing I want to do is I actually want to break down this date that we're going to get from our computer into basically a calendar, because right now I believe it's not really pretty. So we are going to do a calendar constant. And again, I'm going to do NS calendar. And if we hover over, again, holding down the Option key and hovering over NS calendar, it's an object. And what it does is it allows us to oh, I'm sorry. Let's just go ahead and click on it. So what it allows us to do, it allows us to encapsulate information in regards to time, or yeah. So it allows us to do arithmetic. Another great thing it allows us to do is it allows us to break up the date into components that we can use, and what I need is year. Okay, so I'm going to close this out and you'll see what I mean. So I'm going to do dot current calendar, and what that does is it returns a logical calendar for me, the current user. And again, if I want to check this out a little bit more, I can see that, okay, what does that do exactly? So it returns the settings for the current user's chosen system locale. So my system locale might be different from you if you're in another country, or even, yeah, so whatever your system preferences are set to, that's what it's going to look at. And that's on your computer, not in Swift or in Xcode. Actually looks at what your computer is set to. And that's what I want. So we'll do current calendar. And now that we have these two things set up, we can actually break out the components. So I'm going to create another constant, which is components. And that's going to be calendar components. And what I'm going to bring in here is the components. Now, if I again hold down the Option key and hover over components, we can see it returns in a state component object containing a given date decomposed into specified components. So if I go to the reference, we see here that it is a function and it allows us to break out what we need. Let's see what I mean. So the components we need, I'm actually going to do square brackets. I need day, I need month. If you see, Switch is pretty smart. It'll tell you what the components are. I also need year. Now if I want to learn more about these components, click the more, and it will tell you. So NS calendar unit year specifies the year unit. Okay? And then we have month here. There's another one I use, and it specifies the month unit. And day, of course, represents the day unit here. Okay? And if you see, the corresponding value is an NS integer, which is why in my function here I set birth year to an integer, because that's what I'm going to be working with. So do year, and then what's this from date? Well, this is our first constant that we created, which is our date constant, which is what the date is right now on our computer. All right, so I'm going to put in date name right there. Okay. So now we got these couple errors here, and let's see what they are. Well, the first one is, components never used, so we need to use this. So we're going to actually go ahead and use it. So I'm going to do another constant, and this one's going to be year. And what this is going to be equal to is the component constant above, and then year. So I'm actually pulling the year out of our components constant. And then we need to return an integer, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do year minus age. Okay? And so this will calculate the age or the birth year for our person. All right, let's see this in action. So let's create an instance. So I'm going to do var, I'm going to do another player, and this one's going to be, I'm going to start at 10. So I don't know where I stopped, I think it was 5, but I'm going to skip over that. Okay, and then remember we do person with computed property, and then we do our parentheses, and let's create another person. I'm going to do Sally Jones, and she is going to be 30 years old. All right, so now we have an instance of person with computed property. And then let's see if our birth year function works. So we'll do player 10 dot birth year. You can see here that she was born in 1986, and that is absolutely correct. Okay, so you're like, well, what about this computed property you're talking about? Because this is a function, this is a method, this is not a computed property. That's absolutely correct, it is not. But the reason why I did this is to break out and kind of give you what a computed property kind of is. Really, the only thing you need to do, because, I mean, yeah, it's great to have a function birth year, but we want that to be a property, something that's unique to the person. And because we don't really want to ask them how old they are, and then also ask them what their birth year is, we can actually do that calculation, right? So really, the only thing you need to do to make this a computed property is, one, you need to remove the function, keyword, put var. Then you need to remove the parentheses and the arrow and do colon. And that is it. That is a computed property. If you notice here, we get this wonderful error, which says that this is not valid to call on a value of a non-function type int. And so all we do is to fix it, delete it. So now birth year is a computed property. And if you look at the first name, you'll see that that is also a property. And if you notice, what's really interesting about this, if you notice this, that computed properties are indistinguishable from a defined property. So a structure doesn't know the difference between a computed property and a regular property. It just considers it a property. So there you go. That's how you create a computed property. Pretty cool. So if you know how to make a function, you know how to make a computed property. Alright, so we created a computed property. So we're going to do function turned into a computed property. If I know how to spell. That will calculate the birth year. Okay, so we did that. Okay, and then one other thing I wanted to mention is that, of course, computed properties are indistinguishable from defined properties, which I mentioned before. But another thing you can do is you can actually pass a structure as a parameter in a function. And in this section, I'm going to introduce a couple of different things, which I will mention as we go along. So the thing I wanted to mention is, one, we have this lovely function up here, a full name. Now, it's great to have a full name, but that's not really functional in the sense that, say if we, wanted to change Sally's name to somebody else. Say she's no longer player 10 and we wanted to create a new player or add a player in her place. Because say she dropped off or she's no longer playing, but we still have this player 10 variable here. So what I wanted to introduce is basically creating a computed property that will change the name of the person, okay, based on the value up here. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, instead of making this a function, I'm going to make it a computed property. I'll delete that, put the colon, so now it's computed property, and we can test that. We do player 10, and then full name, and it should be Sally Jones, which is absolutely correct. So again, turned a function to computed property. Let's copy that. Alright, and it's not a structure, it's not a method anymore, it's computed property. Alright, so here we have it just returns, the name. But the functionality of what I really want to do is I want to be able to change the person's name entirely by just entering in the full name. So here I'm going to introduce a concept called get and set. So I'm just going to type it in. And we'll do curly brackets. So basically this looks like this. It's get curly brackets. And what this is basically this is just a read-only property. So basically all you see is full name. That's it. You just read it. If you notice, nothing changed down here when I added get. Nothing changed down here at all for Sally Jones. Now, get, what is get? Well, get is a getter, and what it does is it retrieves values indirectly. So it's, of course, retrieve the value, first name, last name. And the thing is, with getters, you can also have setters, and what setters does is exactly what it means. It sets a value. And a setter is, of course, optional. Basically what it does is it can set the property based on what comes in. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do a setter here. And what this setter is going to do is it's going to take in a full name. And again, we do the curly brackets. So this is what the syntax looks like. Set, and we do some variable name. Doesn't necessarily even have to have variable, just has to be some name. And then the curly brackets. Alright. And then, so the setter, what this setter is going to do is it's going to accept a string that's going to come in as a full name. So it's going to have first name, space, last name. And so what we need it to do is we need to split this name, which is going to be a string, into its components, which is going to be first name and last name. So what we're going to do is we're basically going to create an array that that will have the first name and last name. Then we're going to set our variables first name and last name by pulling out those values out of the array. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do let, and then names, or let name, which is going to be the new name that's going to be coming in. And we're going to have this equal the new name, new full name. And then because new full name is a string, because we define full name up here as string, we have all these lovely methods that we can use with with a string. And what I want is the one that's highlighted here, components separated by string. And so what this does, it returns an array containing substrings from a string that have been divided by a given separator. I mentioned before, our given separator is that space that's going to separate the first name and the last name. So we're going to go ahead and use that. And I'm going to define my separator, which is going to be a space with double quotes. Okay, so now that we have that, and now what we want to do is we want to pull the values of this array. Let's see what our little warning here is here. Okay, it's just saying we haven't used it. We will use it in just a moment. So we're going to pull our variable first name up here. And what we're going to make that equal to is the name and its first value. So we're going to pull in the first value, and then the last name will be the second value. So name, square bracket, 1, because we're doing syntax here. Alright, so let's see how our setter is going to do this. So now we're going to say player 10 full name equals, and then we're going to create a new person. So let's do Boris. Oh, do Gross. Alright. So we're like, okay, well, what happened up here? Well, if you notice, we set the full name equal to this new name, Boris Gross, and what our setter did is it went, okay, I will separate the name using the components separated by string, and then the first one will be Boris, and the second one will be Gross. So now the values of the first name should be Boris, and the value of the last name should be Gross. So let's see if that's actually true. So we do player 10 first name, and it should be Boris, yep. And then player 10 last name is now Gross. And then his age should still be 30, because that's what we set Sally's age to be. Let's see if that's actually true. And it is. So we've changed the first name and the last name using a getter. Now I also wanted to mention that you can actually do shorthand as well. So basically the shorthand version of a setter is actually just omitting the name that we set, so the full name. So basically we don't even need that. And then if we hold down Option key and look at full name, we see that it is a string. So we don't even need this variable at all. So we can actually delete it. And then what's going to do is give us an error because there's an identifier that doesn't recognize the full name. So what do we put here? Well, we can just do new value, and it works just fine. So we don't necessarily need to do that. We just need set the curly brackets and use the default variable, which is new value. And it'll still work. So you notice there's no errors or anything. All right, so we'll introduce a little bit of get and set. So if you just use a getter, like before, like I mentioned, that will just be a read-only property. But now that we have the setter here, we can actually modify. So it's not just read-only. I mean, we can still do read-only. Say if I do player 10 full name, just full name, it'll output Boris Gross. But because now that we have the setter, we can actually change the name as well as set the name, the first name and last name to what comes in. All right, so the next thing I wanted to introduce is a structure passed in as a parameter in a function. So let's do a function here that will transform a player. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new player. So this is going to be the original player here. I'm actually going to do player, let's do this one up here, player with computer property, since this is the closest one. Oops. Copy. And paste it here. So I'm going to create a new player, and his name is going to be John, and his last name is going to be Lee, and his age is going to be 20. Okay, so I have a new player, and now I want to transform this player. So let's say I just want to do some work on this player. So I'm going to do function transform player, and we'll do var. So we're going to take in a player, and here's where we pass in a structure. So a structure is a type. So what I can do is I can actually do person with computer property and return person with computer property. So I'm actually passing in a struct into a function as a parameter. I'm also returning it as well. So say if I have player 1, first name equals Joe, and then player last name. Actually, I want to do John Doe, so just because it's fun. Okay, and we have a little error code because we need to return our player. And so now I can transform this original player into John Doe by, just using our function here. So we do var new player equals transform player, and then I'm going to bring in the original player. And what it should do is it should transform. So what it's going to do is it's actually going to take the settings for John Lee, transform it by changing the name to John Doe into this new variable or new instance, new player. So if we look at new player, if we look at the age, it should be 20, which it is. And if we look at the new player's name, it should be John, and it is. So that's how you pass in a structure as a parameter into a function, and as well as outputting that same structure. Alright, so it's a very short video. Again, just introducing you to computed properties. Basically, how to create them is something we've already done with methods inside of a structure. We just basically do a func, we put what work we want it to do, and then we just change it into a variable. And again, computed properties and stored properties are just properties to the structure. It doesn't know and it doesn't distinguish one from the other. It's a property. And then I showed you how to pass the structure into a function as a parameter, as well as return that same structure. I also introduced get and set, and yeah. So hopefully you found this interesting. There is a little bit more about structures, but I want to introduce them really later on, because it's best to have a real example that is real world. So if you found this video informative, if it's helped you at all, please like it. If you found any of my videos interesting and you want to stay in touch, please subscribe. Thank you, and code on, my friends.